Planning a trip to Europe can be a really daunting task for first-timers, from picking where to go and finding flights to choosing hotels and building itineraries. It's all a lot of stress. But don't worry, I'm here to make it easy. Today, I'm going to be walking you through step-by-step how to plan your own trip to Europe. Hi, I'm Christina from happytowonder.com. I've been traveling around Europe for the past 10 years, and my goal on this channel is to help you travel Europe smarter. So let's walk you through the step-by-step process of planning your own dream trip to Europe. This is going to be a pretty long video, but hopefully by the end of it, you'll have all the tools and resources that you need to plan your own trip. And stick around until the end, and I'll even give you a free workbook that helps you do exactly that. All right, so step one is understanding the Schengen zone. Before we can talk about visas and entry requirements and all that, you need to understand what the Schengen zone is. So a lot of people assume that in Europe, it's all border-free travel, but that's actually not the case in all countries. And the whole travel without borders thing only actually applies to a certain zone known as the Schengen zone. Granted, this is a huge group covering 27 countries, but it doesn't include all the countries in Europe. So a few notable exceptions include the UK, Ireland, Bulgaria, Romania, and a lot of countries in the Balkan region. As of 2023, these are the countries that belong to the Schengen zone. So as you can see, it comprises a lot of the countries that a lot of first-time visitors will be visiting, but it's important that you know that distinction. Practically speaking, with the Schengen zone, it essentially means that if you stay within this zone of countries, you're not going to need to go through passport control every single time you cross the border. An important note is a lot of people confuse the Schengen zone with the EU, and even though there is a lot of overlap, they're actually not the same thing. So there are a lot of EU countries that are part of the Schengen zone and some non-EU countries that are part of it as well. So just keep that in mind that they're not the same. Now, the reason it's important to know this distinction is because that can impact which visas you apply for if you need to apply for a visa, and it also impacts how long you can stay in each of the countries that you're visiting. For more clarifications and examples, I have written a full guide to the Schengen zone, and you can find it on my website. Now, after you wrap your head around that one, we're going to move on to step number 2, which is how long you're actually going to be spending in Europe. And this is a really important question to ask yourself. Honestly, my first independent trip around Europe, I spent about 6 weeks, and that felt like barely enough. I would honestly recommend a 10-day minimum if you're coming from overseas, just because you have to make that jet lag worth it. But of course, it really depends on how many vacation days you have to work with. And don't worry if you even have just a week to spend in Europe. I actually have a video coming out in 2 weeks' time covering 40 different one-week itineraries for Europe, so be sure to subscribe for that. Of course, choosing how long you're going to spend in Europe really depends on a lot of personal factors, so I'll leave that up to you. The one thing that I will say is it is important to keep in mind the time restrictions that you have on how long you're allowed to be in Europe. Many non-EU passport holders are restricted to only 90 days within 180 days when you're visiting the Schengen area, and all the non-Schengen countries actually have their own specific rules on how long you're allowed to stay. So if you're smart about it and you actually wanted to spend longer than 90 days in Europe, what you could do is spend 90 days in the Schengen zone and then spend more time outside of the Schengen zone, and then you don't overstay any of your allowances and you're golden. Now, after you figured out how much time you have to play with, you get to decide the really fun stuff, where you're gonna go. So I know that Europe looks really small on a map, but it's important to keep in mind that it's a very varied continent with a lot to see, a really high density of sites, meaning that you're not probably going to be able to see every single thing that you want to see in just a single trip. So a lot of first-time visitors really assume that they're going to be able to do this. They're like, oh, I'm going to go to Europe. I'm going to cover the whole continent because everything is super close together. And yes, things are a lot closer together than cities in North America, for example, but it still does take time to travel between countries. So my advice to you is to really just pick a few destinations and not try to overcram your itinerary. I remember when I was planning my first backpacking trip in Europe, and I planned the itinerary after like a few glasses of wine, and I looked at it the next day and realized it made no sense because I was trying to go to way too many places and it just didn't add up. So for shorter trips, what I would really recommend is you just pick 1 or 2 countries and explore them more thoroughly rather than trying to cover a whole bunch of destinations in one go. But how can you decide where you want to go? So first of all, again, cheap plug, I do have 40+ different itineraries for 1 week in Europe. So you can browse that on my website. You can also look on my website for all the different places I've visited and can recommend. Of course, you probably have a lot of places saved on your bucket list as well. Usually when I start planning for a trip, I'll hop onto TikTok or on Instagram, browse on Pinterest, kind of get some ideas and just shortlist a few destinations. Now, after you've picked where you want to go, the next step is to apply for visas and figure out any documents that you might need for your Europe trip. I, of course, can't give specific advice unless you're Canadian because that's what I am, and entry requirements do vary based on where you're from or what passport you have. If you are Canadian, however, and I believe the rules are the same if you're from the US or from Australia, you do not need a visa to enter the Schengen zone. You're allowed to enter without applying for any visa beforehand. That said, as of 2023, you do need something called an ETIAS, which stands for European Travel Information and Authorization System form, which is a very quick thing that you can do online. You pay a small fee, but that's not the same thing as applying for a visa. Don't worry, visas take a lot longer to apply for, and it's just generally a more stressful process, but the ETIS is not actually that difficult. Now, the best resource for finding out which visas you need is your own government's website, okay? When you're Googling things, be sure to seek out only official sources, because I found that when you search up visa requirements and things like that, you often find a lot of third-party websites that are just trying to persuade you to purchasing their services. So the first step is to find your official government website, and they can detail all the different requirements that there are for entering different countries with your passport. Now, moving on to step 5, the exciting stuff, is time to book your flights to Europe. Now, before we go into the step-by-step, something I definitely consider getting is a travel-friendly credit card before booking your big trip, just because you are probably going to be spending quite a bit of money on your flights and on your hotels and just general spending. So it really makes sense to have a credit card that awards you for your spending, because you're going to be spending that money anyway, so you might as well get some points for it. So I personally have the Amex Platinum, and I really do love it. I think it's super worth it. I know that the fee for that card is super high, but at least for the first year, with the welcome bonus, you actually are able to get a free round trip flight to Europe, essentially. So I think it's really worth it, and I can highly recommend that card, but that is just another topic for another day. So if you're looking for more tips on securing cheap flights, I do have a full video all about that, but right now I'm just gonna walk you through the process that I typically use. So the first thing I'll usually do is I'll hop on Google Flights, which is my go-to tool these days. I used to use a lot of Skyscanner, but Google Flights just makes things super easy, and so I prefer them these days. First off, what I'll do is I'll go in and type my departure airport. If you are lucky and have multiple airports to choose from, let's say you've got multiple airports in your city or other airports close by that you don't mind traveling to if it means a better deal, then you can type in with the passport codes the different airports that you are searching up. And then in terms of the destination, if you already have a specific destination in mind, of course you can just type that in, but if not, then you can also just type Europe, because then it'll show you the cheapest flights just going to all the different countries in Europe, and oftentimes that'll save you a bunch of money if you just fly into a cheaper airport and you have some flexibility. So for dates, again, if you have a specific date, you can enter them, or you can just enter a rough estimate, and I'll show you in the next step how you can then look at a bunch of other dates at a glance. So let's say you're not really sure, but you know you probably want to go for a week in June at some point, so just throw that in there and then search. So once you're here in this map view, then what you can do is you can click on the calendar here, and you can click flexible dates, and then that'll allow you to search different flight options depending on how long you're going for. So let's say a weekend, 1 week, 2 weeks, and also you can select the time frame. So you can do a 1 week trip in the next 6 months, for example, or specifically a 1 week trip in February, June, July, whenever. So I'll usually have a little bit of a play with that, and then I'll look around at the map at a glance and see where are the cheapest flights? Where can I fly into that is the cheapest? So when you look at the list, if you see one that you like in particular, you're like, oh, I don't mind going to London. The flights there look cheap, so then you can click there. And then after that, you can click view flights. And then you have my personal favorite tool, the date grid that you can click on. So there's actually a button that you can click date grid, and it shows you on a table how the prices fluctuate depending on when you leave. So it'll be like, oh, okay, well, if you left a few days earlier, then it can actually be cheaper. So there's a lot of really cool tools that you can use in Google Flights, which is why I really, really like using them. And so that's just the general process that I use for finding cheap flights. Again, you can repeat this process for different cities, comparing prices, and ultimately you can decide which one you want to go for. The one thing I will say is after you do choose your flight, what I tend to do is I always book directly with the airline, just because I feel like that gives you a lot more protection if anything ever goes wrong. Airlines tend to have way better customer service than some of those third parties. Now, step 6 is to book your accommodation. After you've got your flights, it's time to decide where you're gonna sleep. Now, I personally love using aggregators like Google or Booking.com just to do my initial research, because I feel like they offer a lot of tools that help you whittle down your options. And if you're interested in the step-by-step process that I use to book my hotels and everything, I'm releasing a full video all about that next week. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. But for now, here is a quickish rundown. So in terms of your accommodation options, you've got a huge range from the cheapest, like hostels and guest houses, to more expensive, like hotels. And of course, there's Airbnb and Verbos, like vacation rentals that are kind of this awkward in between. So I'm gonna quickly run through the pros and cons of all these different accommodation options. Now, hostels are a great option if you're on a budget and or if you're looking for more of a social experience. So in terms of pros, hostels in Europe can actually be really nice. There's a lot of really beautiful hostels in Europe, and they're very nice for the wallet as well, with options for private rooms in addition to dorms if you want a little bit more privacy. Hostels are also just really great in general for meeting new people. If your goal is to make some new friends, let's say you're traveling alone, hostels really are the go-to option. Of course, the flip side downside of that is you don't get much privacy, and honestly, even the nicest hostels will seem quite bare bones compared to nicer hotels, and they're kind of an introvert's nightmare. So if you're an introvert like me, hostels might not be the best choice. Now, the next tier budget-wise would be guest houses, which are typically smaller than hotels and usually involve a few rooms, typically en suite at their property. Now, pros are these guest houses are usually cheaper than hotels and they feel a lot homier. They also tend to feel more personal because the owner often greets you and shows you the room, so it feels more like you're kind of supporting a small local business. However, the cons are they tend to be more modest and have far fewer amenities than hotels. They can also be less convenient because there's not usually like a 24-hour check-in desk, so you do have to coordinate a little bit with the owner of the guest house. And then we have hotels, which tend to be larger properties with familiar amenities like a check-in desk, breakfast, etc. Now, when it comes to hotels, one really important thing to keep in mind is that hotels in Europe actually operate on a different star system to what we're used to in North America. So whereas in North America, if you're staying at a one-star property, you kind of know what you're expecting. One star kind of means like low quality, like not the best, right? Whereas 5-star, usually you could expect a certain level of niceness. The system in Europe is actually quite different. So the star system there is actually based on a checklist of amenities. So I've personally stayed in a lot of really nice 2-star properties in Europe that are just smaller and don't necessarily have like all the big amenities, but they've been really, really nice. So remember to keep that in mind when you're looking at the different accommodation options. Now, in terms of choosing hotels, you'll be choosing between either a chain property, like, Hilton's and Marriott, or you can choose boutique properties, which are usually more one of a kind. Personally, these days, I'm more inclined to pick boutique hotels when I can, but I do admit there is a nice reliability when it comes to chain hotels. And of course, if you're also racking up loyalty points or anything like that, then it does make sense to stick to a chain, but that's a decision for you to make. Boutique properties vary from city to city, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. I will say if I've ever stayed somewhere really spectacular that I recommend, I always link to it on my website. Now onto the last option, which is vacation rentals like Airbnb or Vrbo. Now, I used to be a really big fan of renting on Airbnb because it was a really budget-friendly option once upon a time, and you could save a lot of money too by cooking at the property that you're renting. But these days, with extreme fees and just like hosts that are a little bit out of control, I don't actually think it's the best option anymore, especially if you're looking at shorter stays. So Airbnbs can come with a lot of additional mental labor. You have to correspond with your host, you have to organize a meeting time. Sometimes they'll ask you to do chores before you leave. So there's a lot of different considerations to be made when you're booking an Airbnb. So if it's just for a few days, I personally don't think it's worth it. Now, the last tip I'll offer is to always book direct. Most of the time, hotels will offer some kind of incentive for travelers to book directly with them, just so they can avoid the additional fees that they get when people book on booking.com. So for example, a lot of places will offer free breakfast or they'll give you a small discount. So if you're looking to save some money, it never hurts to check out the official hotel website and see if the price is better, or you can actually just call them and be like, hey, I noticed that on booking.com, the price is like this. Is there something that you can offer me if I book directly? It doesn't hurt to ask. Now, step number 7 is to choose how you're going to get around Europe. So I will say overall, public transportation in Europe is fantastic, and you're probably not going to need to rent a car unless you're going to be doing lots of nature stuff or you're planning on visiting more remote locations like little villages. So overall, I'd say to keep your life simple, stick with public transportation. My first move is I usually hop on Omio, and this is a really great free tool that you can use to compare transport options from point A to point B. So let's say you're going from Paris to London, it'll show you all the different buses, all the different trains, all the different flights, and then from there you can kind of suss out which option is probably the best. Now, if you want to learn more about the cheap ways to travel around Europe, I do have a full video all about that, but I'm going to quickly run through the options from cheapest to most expensive and their pros and cons. So first is buses. Buses or coaches is what they call them in the UK. Now, the pros of these is, they're really, really cheap. There's a lot of budget companies that offer bus travel, and you can get from one city to the next for like $10. And usually you're dropped off somewhere close-ish to the city center, so it's quite convenient as well. And the cons are you do have to deal with traffic, and oftentimes it's just not as nice or as comfortable as taking a train. Now, the next option is trains. The pros of trains, of course, is that they're very comfortable, very scenic, and it does feel like a very European experience, especially if you're like me and you come from somewhere where intercity rail travel is just not really commonly used. Another great perk is that you do arrive in the city centers, and it can be very flexible if you get a rail pass. The cons, of course, is that train travel isn't always the fastest. I mean, it depends on where you're going, but it's not usually faster than a flight, and it can be very expensive, especially if you're booking last minute. The next option is flights. The pros, of course, is that it's super quick. Sometimes it can be very cheap as well if you're using European budget airlines. The cons are that you arrive outside of the city center because the airport's never actually close to the center, and it can be expensive for flights flights if you're booking last minute. And of course, there's the environmental impact of flying as well. Now, step 8, we're getting into the itinerary planning. It's time to decide what kind of stuff you're gonna do when you end up going to Europe. So if you've gotten this far in this video, I think it's pretty clear I am a planner and I really do like knowing what there is to do in a place before I get there so I can maximize my time. Now, as fun as it is to be spontaneous, I do think it is important to do at least some research before you arrive to the destination, because the last thing that you want to do is to be wasting precious time in the destination trying to decide what to do and trying to figure out what you're going to be spending time doing when really you could use that time to eat spaghetti, you know? So here is how I find fun things to do wherever I go. So first I hop on Google, of course, and I Google things to do in the destination. Then the next step is I'll usually skim through whatever blogs and listicles come up just to get a general sense of what the top touristy things to do are. And then if I see any that I'm interested in, I'll hop on my Google map and I'll star it. Now, this is where a lot of people will stop their research, but honestly, I think that's really just the bare minimum. And so usually what I'll do is I'll extend my research and try to find like more hidden gems and things that aren't commonly recommended. So my next stop usually is I'll go on Atlas Obscura, which is a really cool website that highlights unusual things to do in a place. Again, I look through, star a bunch of places, and that's it. Then I'll hop on social media. TikTok is actually my personal favorite search tool. It's a great search tool compared to Instagram, and you can usually get a lot of wonderful ideas, especially in the food and drink sphere. So again, I'll go through TikTok, I'll search up places to eat in X place, and then I'll star the places on my Google Maps. And last but not least, I will usually look on local blogs, especially event and news ones, because then you can see if there's any cool events happening or any cool pop-ups happening in your destination. So you might be wondering why I starred all these places on Google Maps and just left them. So the reason that I do that instead of making a list is when you have the stars on a map, then you can actually cluster the different activities based on location. And that can be really handy when you're in a destination, because if you're walking around and you look at your map, you can see, oh, actually like this cute coffee shop I saw on TikTok is really close to where we are. So then you can just casually stop in. And that is a lot easier to manage, I think, than having just a list of places, because then you don't know where exactly those places are and it can get kind of messy. And here's a pro tip. If you are really struggling to organize all the different activities that you want to do, usually if you type in destination plus itinerary, there's probably a travel blogger out there like me who has put together an itinerary already that you can use for inspiration. All right, lastly, we're on to step 9, which is choosing what to pack. Now, I have a lot of other videos and articles about packing, so be sure to check those out. But here are some general tips to keep in mind. I'm a big believer in traveling carry-on only, especially when you're traveling to Europe, because navigating cobblestone streets and really stuffy metro systems is not ideal if you've got really heavy bags. At the very least, any suitcase you bring, make sure you're able to carry it, because sometimes you'll find that, you know, there aren't elevators everywhere. You might have to lug your suitcase up some stairs. So yeah, be sure to either work out beforehand or make sure that anything you bring is like a suitcase that you can personally carry yourself. I'd also really recommend buying packing cubes. If you're new to this channel, you might not know this. I am obsessed with packing cubes. I love them so much. They're really cheap and they're just a reusable tool that you can use for every trip. So make sure to grab a set of those, because honestly, they can keep your clothes so organized. And overall, what I would do is pack just a week's worth of clothes in all instances, even if you're traveling for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because you can do laundry on the road and it just makes more sense to pack lighter that way. Apart from that, I think packing is just a really personal thing and you should just wear whatever makes you comfortable. But if you do need some inspiration, I do have 2 free printable packing lists that you can steal from my website, one for winter and one for summer. So there you have it, from start to finish, how to plan your own trip to Europe. I hope that was useful. And if you're looking for that free workbook, I promise you can find it right here. Thanks for watching. If you want more practical travel videos just like this one, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you next week. Thank you. Bye.